And I put a tweet out today after the report from Kemi Badenoch on The Spectator, where she basically said, not in full, that they would form a coalition with Reform if Reform was to fall short at the next general election, but she said that they would vote on their lines depending on issues, which basically is like a quid pro quo agreement. The Tory party would say, we'll vote for this as long as you either A, amend this within it, or you put forward a bill about this, or we amend this piece of legislation. That's kind of how it works. A big example was like the DUP that worked with the Tory government about Brexit. The agreement was that the DUP would vote in line with the Tory government. In return, the Tory government would try and amend the Brexit deal with the EU to benefit Northern Ireland. That was the goal. That was the quid pro quo. That was us saying, hey, look, if you help us with this, we'll do this back for you. That's how it works. So that's kind of what Kemi's been saying. And I've already predicted that they will end up forming a coalition. I'll tell you why I think that is the case. The Conservative Party, as the Uniparty, as the biggest party for 100 years or so, over 100 years now, they will want to remain as the dominant factor. They'll want to remain as a key player in British politics. It will be an ego-driven decision where they would work in tangent, in coalition with Reform. Although Kemi's saying right now, no, closer towards the election, I guarantee you she will put that deal on the table. She will say no now to save face, to not appear weak. We're still 3 years off the general election. But she will say that closer to the time. She will say, look, we will work with you in certain areas. I imagine she would probably stand down in some swing areas. Nigel Farage has done this before. Do you remember the Brexit Party? The Brexit Party stood down in certain areas during the general election to allow the Tories to gain that majority so they could put forward a Brexit deal. That was the original agreement. It was, we will stand down in certain areas to allow you to have the chance at gaining a majority so that we can move forward with a Brexit deal. So when the shoe is on the other foot, I guarantee you, closer to the general election, depending on polling, if the Conservatives are doing all right in certain areas but are at risk at losing Reform, the votes, compared to the Labour Party or the Green Party, Kemi Badenoch will be willing to stand down in certain areas for an agreement that a coalition will be formed after the election. That will be the deal. Because then Kemi and the Conservative Party can have a tighter leash around Nigel Farage's neck. And that's what they want. They want the control over Reform. They want the control over Farage. Farage's entire career has not actually been anything different from the Tory party. It's not actually been anything different from what we've seen for the last 14 years of Tory government. But what he actually wants to do is belittle the Tory party. He's always seen them as a rival. That's what his career is built on. It's belittling the Tory party. So you will see that coalition become more likely closer to the general election. And I know people have been doubting me on that, but I even said before Kemi declared that she would work with Reform, that that was a possibility. And remember, it was only a few months ago, after the Tory conference last year, where she basically said, that's not a possibility, we would never do that. And now already, after the local elections, she's saying, that is a possibility, that is something that we would do. So it's pretty obvious where that's going. It's pretty obvious where that situation is heading. And I put this tweet out earlier where I basically said that Reform will form the next government. They will have a minority government, but they will form the next government, especially if Burnham becomes Prime Minister, which is looking extremely likely and was obvious from the beginning of this by-election, especially with Restore standing. And I'm not saying Reform is owed your vote, but I'm also not saying that Restore is owed your vote. Neither of them, no party is owed your vote. And this is why I keep saying you've got to demand more. This is why I critique Restore's chance at standing. This is why I critique their candidate. This is why I've critiqued things like going on about Scott Benton, allowing Scott Benton into the party, allowing Ben Habib to be there canvassing in Makerfield. And I've already said this to everybody that's involved in Restore. Restore captures the chunk of nationalists in this country. Most nationalists have flooded to Restore. They flocked over there. But they are willing to be subverted. The nationalists there are supposed to be very much so staunchly for our people, staunchly ethno-nationalist, ethnic-centric. They are allowing themselves to be subverted, making excuses for your Scott Bentons, making excuses for Habib. And it shouldn't be like that. I'm like, this is where you demand more. If nationalists want a chance at government, if they want a chance at any form of political power, there's two things they need to be aware of. Number one, a coalition between the Tories and Reform would be the death of nationalism for at least another decade. At least. Number two, if you want a chance, your foot in the door, you need to be the party which Reform is forced to either form a coalition government with or do the quid pro quo deals with. If they're relying on you and your vote, say Restore get 40 MPs, that's probably the max I think they could get at the general election. If they get 40 MPs, and I imagine they would also look at trying to do deals with the Tories to avoid Starmer or Burnham, more than likely Burnham at this point, or the Greens getting in. Restore will need to look at being the party that Reform has to use to push forward legislation, to have a hand over Parliament. So that's what people in Restore need to do. That's why people in Restore need to be aware of the current situation. It's all good trying to sit there and exist in fantasy land, but that's not reality. The reality is you are looking at a situation where Nigel Farage will be the next Prime Minister with a minority government, and he is going to form a coalition one way or another. He needs it because he needs power. That can either be the Tories, which will deadlock you out, or that can be Restore. And I'll tell you how it's going to go. Burnham will win the by-election on Thursday. After that, what you will see is this internal battle with the Labour Party, with Keir Starmer still refusing to go currently. You will see this internal battle continue. After that, you will see Starmer eventually gets kicked out. A leadership election is called. The majority of Labour members will vote for Burnham. He will probably win about 60% of the vote. You will then see Burnham try and implement harsher immigration policy. He will start trying to appeal to the North. He will start talking about HS2 and investments in transport and industry up in the North, government investments and all of those things. What you will then see in the local elections next year, 2028, is Labour will gain back ground in the North. They will gain back council seats that they have lost in the North, and you will begin to see the rebuilding of the Red Wall. With that, the Uniparty will begin to turn its gears again. You will then see in the 2029 local elections, you will see the Conservatives begin to do better, because people will be worried about Labour getting into power. A lot of the old generational voters will go back to the Conservative Party, and they will try and see, okay, we need to deal with this red-blue divide again. So you will see the Conservatives do better in the local elections. Then come the 2029 general election. Depending on where polling's at, what you'll probably see is the Conservatives make an alliance with Reform about certain seats that they will stand in and not stand in to try and take down Labour and prevent it from gaining power in 2029. That is the current trajectory that we are on. That is the current path that we're on. People don't want to admit that, but that is the reality.